Hello students, today I want to talk about genetic engineering. This is a hot topic in our society and has been for a couple of decades now, and there's no right or wrong answer about whether or not we should be using genetic engineering in society. It is a great example of how you need to put your thinking cap on and decide for yourself what you think about genetic engineering because the information out there, it's really divisive from both sides. So my first interaction with genetic engineering happened when I was an undergrad in the 90s. Uh, Genetic engineering was a new concept, and uh, Dolly had just been cloned, the sheep. We'll take a look at her in a second. And my general conclusion after conducting the research was there was little evidence to suggest that genetic engineering was all bad. There's really no evidence to suggest that it's bad for humans. There's a lot of contentious issues from an environmental perspective. Um, but my basic conclusion was that the environmentalists were lying, just like how I would think that, a conservative scientist or a politician might lie about an issue. And this is one of the references that I found that showed that kind of sensationalism that made me step back and think, wow, I really need to think for myself and decide for myself. I can't just rely on the news of the that I choose to read. Okay, so oops, let's back up. So let's take a look. It's just 1 minute video.
Ah, the holidays. That magical time of year is upon us once again. If you're like 99% of American families, you'll be bringing Kraft Foods into your home this holiday season. And by doing so, you'll also be taking part in the largest genetically engineered food experiment in history. That's right. Kraft is using ingredients genetically engineered in a laboratory. They're serving up new and inadequately tested combinations of DNA never before eaten by human beings, posing risks to our health such as new allergies, new toxins, and antibiotic resistance. And that's why Kraft counts on you and your family to help them determine the health effects of eating virtually unregulated genetically engineered foods. This method of product safety testing is a favorite of Kraft's parent company, tobacco giant Philip Morris. The truth is, Kraft really doesn't know what genetically engineered products will do to us.
Tell Kraft you don't want to be part of the experiment.
Okay, so what is genetic engineering? Essentially, it's taking the DNA material from one organism and putting it into another. Remember, our last video we watched was about cells and common ancestors. So DNA is one thing that is common to all organisms on the planet. And so we have found that we can take DNA from one organism and put it into another, and it will be assimilated. Here's another image to look at. So this is Harvard reference, academic, check. So the process of genetic engineering. Essentially, we look for traits that we want to see in the new organism. So this might be larger fruits or cold tolerance, anything like this, okay? And we isolate the gene of interest. This alone has been a long biological journey. Sequencing genomes is something that we've just really learned how to do in the last couple of decades. So we take the desired trait, and we put it into a plasmid of a bacteria. So we add it to this bacterial DNA, okay? And there are two methods. There is a physical method where you actually shoot the DNA into another organism, and the other one is to introduce the bacterium to the new organism. Now, I actually saw this happening when I was in college. We went on a field trip to Cornell and we saw the first gene gun. It was really mind-boggling to think about. It was just a glass box. But, to think about being able to manipulate constituents this tiny, really, really tiny, is something to ponder in itself. Then we grow the genetically modified crops, test them, etc., and we're on our way. So let's go back. So the result is what we call recombinant DNA, so recombined DNA, okay? Why do we do this? Well, we really like standardization, okay? Our entire world is scaled to billions of human beings. So if you want to get food that is always the same and never has blemishes, the GMO organisms really help this to happen. And so they have contributed to yields for farmers and consistency in product marketing for us. So I mentioned Dolly the sheep. So let's see, in 1996, Dolly was cloned. So she's a cloned organism. They took some DNA from the parent and they put it in a new embryo, and here we are. Dolly is a clone of her mother. Okay, this raised international havoc in the science community. Oh my goodness, we cloned an organism, and this organism is an animal, and humans are animals. So this was a lot for us to think about, and we still are talking about it because now we can manipulate the genes of human beings through gene therapy. We can do prenatal testing to know what kinds of genetic anomalies might exist in our offspring, and all of these things raise ethical issues. So why do we do it? Dolly was just, can we do it? Okay, but now there are really practical applications for doing it. So for example, this plum is genetically engineered to resist disease. Okay, looks like an ordinary plum, but it has a gene in it that resists disease. Another classic example is golden rice. So hundreds of thousands of children die before the age of 5 from a vitamin A deficiency. And vitamin A is developed from beta carotene, and that is developed literally from colored red and orange colored foods. So we added the beta carotene to the rice, and this has increased nutrition in the developing world dramatically, saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of children every year. Okay? Some would argue there are other ways to handle this, but this is the classic example of why genetic engineering should be used to improve the lives of human beings across the planet. On a more fun note, here are some glowfish. I've had these genetically modified organisms in my fish tank before for my 10-year-old daughter and didn't know they were genetically modified at the time. But essentially, these are just ordinary plain-looking fish that whose genomes have been altered so that they produce this variation in color. Okay, so how do we do this? We're thinking back to that Harvard website. After we produce the genetically engineered organism, we need to test it, right? So this is in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And this is just showing you the kinds of standardization and exact similarity that we're looking for in our food crops. And the result is corn that looks like this, okay? When you go to spend money at the grocery store, you probably want to know that your corn is nice and perfect. I was volunteering in Salida a couple years ago, and there is a food bank farm there, and I was really fascinated we were husking corn to send off to food banks, and almost all corn was eaten by insects about this much down every single ear of corn. Never ever have I seen that in the grocery store. But good enough for a food bank, we just cut that part off and the rest of the ear of corn went off to the food bank. But it gave me a lot of perspective on what our food might look like if we were not doing something like this. This is what maize, historic corn, actually looks like. Remember that each kernel of corn is an independent fertilization event. So every single kernel of corn is an ovule that was fertilized by a sperm. And the pollen sperm is at the top of the corn. You know, the tassels are at the top, and this is gravity facilitated and wind facilitated pollination. So every single kernel is an independent fertilization event, and you can see great variability here because there are different genes in the pollen, each grain of pollen, and that contributes to genetic diversity. We don't want to lose this. So one of the largest environmental concerns with genetic engineering is, are the genetically modified organisms' DNA going to get into our natural genetic diversity? So here's a bunch of different kinds of potatoes. Looks pretty different than your standard Yukon Gold or regular potato that you get at the grocery store. Okay, again, each potato represents genetic diversity. So we don't want to lose this genetic diversity, because diversity, as we're learning in other contexts, is what helps us to resist disease and other ailments that would prevent us from reproducing and leaving our alleles in the next generation. So genetic diversity helps evolution to occur. Evolution is how we have survived, the organisms that are still on the planet all these years. Okay? All right, that's the end of my slideshow. I hope this gave you a lot of food for thought, pardon the pun, and you're going to need to make a choice and consider how you will have genetic engineering interact with your life. All right, have a great day.